In the bitter winter of 1812, Illinois was not the bustling heartland we know today. It was an untamed wilderness, dense forests stretching endlessly, their skeletal branches clawing at the iron-gray sky. A place where the wind carried secrets, and isolation bred whispers no one dared repeat aloud. The settlers who braved this land were hardened souls, driven by the promise of fertile soil and freedom. Yet, amid their determination, something far darker was taking root, something that would stain the name Ravencroft in blood and fear for generations. The story we uncover tonight is not just a tale of murder or madness. It is a descent into the abyss of obsession, ritual, and a family so consumed by their own ambitions that the line between science and sacrilege vanished entirely. Recently unearthed letters, sealed court transcripts, and fragments of a journal believed to belong to Alistair Ravencroft himself revealed details the world was never meant to see. These pages, yellowed with time and flecked with stains no archivist could explain, hinted experiments too grotesque for even the darkest corners of medical history. But here is the chilling truth. What happened inside the Ravencroft estate was not a single night of horror. It was years of secrecy, of blood drawn in candlelit rooms, of hymns whispered in a language older than the land itself. And when the first frosts thawed in the spring of 1813, 12 settlers, men, women, and children, were simply gone. Their cabins stood silent, hearths still warm, tables set for meals that would never be eaten. All that remained were claw-like scratches on wooden doors and tracks in the snow that led nowhere. Tonight, we reveal what really happened to the Ravencroft family, the truth behind Illinois' most forbidden chapter, a truth so sinister, even local historians refuse to speak its name aloud. This story isn't for everyone. It isn't for the faint-hearted or the curious thrill-seeker. This is for those who are brave enough to look into the dark and not flinch, because once you hear what we've uncovered, you won't be able to forget it. Before we begin, let me ask you, where are you listening from tonight? Would you dare walk through the ruins of Ravencroft Hollow if you knew what slept beneath its soil? Tell us in the comments. I'm curious who among you would step into that silence. But remember this as you answer, because after tonight, Illinois will never look the same to you again. The question we start with is this: how does a family go from privilege and respect to whispers of blood drinking and unholy rituals? To answer that, we have to return to the Illinois Territory in the year 1812, a land teetering between law and lawlessness, faith and fear. And there, in the heart of this desolation, stood a sprawling estate, its windows shuttered, its halls silent, and its name etched in secrets that would one day terrify a nation. In the early months of 1812, the Illinois Territory was a land balanced on the edge of civilization and chaos. The War of 1812 had just begun to rumble in the distance, sending waves of fear through the scattered settlements that clung stubbornly to the wilderness. This was not a place of comfort or safety. It was a harsh, untamed expanse where winters came early, and the nights stretched long, filled with sounds no one could name. Wolves prowled the frozen woods, and beyond them lay dangers far greater: starvation, disease, and the uneasy tension between settlers and the native tribes who had called this land home for centuries. Settlement was sparse. A handful of crude cabins stood like broken teeth along the Mississippi and Illinois rivers, their smoke rising in thin threads into a sky the color of iron. Roads were little more than rutted trails carved by wagon wheels. There were no telegraphs, no rapid rescue, only vast isolation. If you vanished here, you were simply gone, swallowed whole by the land. Superstition ruled as much as scripture. Every new settler brought stories of spirits in the trees, curses laid upon the soil, and strange lights flickering in the distance when the fog rolled in thick from the rivers. Ministers warned of the devil's work lurking in darkened forests, while healers spoke of old remedies whispered from mother to daughter, things best left unspoken in polite company. Fear was not a visitor here, it was a resident. And in this fragile, shifting world came the Ravencrofts, a name that, even then, carried weight and whispers. They were not pioneers in the common sense. They did not arrive penniless or desperate. They came with resources, with knowledge, and with something else that set them apart from the others, an air of mystery that never quite left them. While most settlers fought to keep their children alive through harsh winters, the Ravencrofts erected a manor house with imported glass windows and carved banisters that gleamed in candlelight. To the weary eyes of farmers living in log huts, the estate rising in the clearing seemed almost otherworldly. But with that grandeur came unease. For while the war raged far to the east, While men vanished into battle and disease swept through river towns, the Ravencroft estate stood untouched. It was as if misfortune could not cross its threshold, or perhaps, as some began to whisper, because it had already made its home there. In the records we've uncovered, Illinois in 1812 was not simply a backdrop, it was a crucible, a place where law was distant and superstition reigned, where a family could practice things unspeakable behind shuttered windows and heavy oak doors without fear of intrusion. And it is within this grim and lawless silence that the tale of the Ravencrofts began to fester. Next, we step through those doors and into the dim corridors of the Manor. Who were these people, and what dark legacy did they carry with them into the Illinois wilderness? They arrived without warning. No procession, no grand announcement, only the groan of wagon wheels echoing through the frozen Illinois timber in the winter of 1812. The Ravencroft family settled in a clearing miles from the nearest settlement, bringing with them crates so heavy it took 6 men to lift them, their contents never revealed. Among the whispers of those who glimpsed them, one thing was certain: this was no ordinary pioneer family. The patriarch, Alistair Ravencroft, was a tall man with a presence that drew silence the moment he entered a room. His hair was jet black, streaked prematurely with silver, and his eyes, cold, pale gray, seemed to pierce through those who met his gaze. He introduced himself as a physician, though no one ever saw him treat the sick, and the tools he brought, iron clamps, delicate glass tubes, jars filled with viscous fluids, were unlike any used by frontier doctors. The few who spoke with him described a man of education, his speech tinged with the refined cadence of Boston, yet shadowed by something unnameable. It was said his questions were never about crops or weather, but about bloodlines, who was related to whom, what illnesses ran in which families, and how pure the settlements truly were. His wife Evangeline was a vision that unsettled even the devout. She was pale as winter frost, her dark hair cascading to her waist, and her voice, when heard in the rare moments she spoke in public, carried a melodic quality that lingered like a hymn in the air. The settlers whispered that her beauty was unnatural, that her eyes seemed too luminous, reflecting candlelight even in shadow. Women crossed themselves when she passed, children hid behind their mothers' skirts. Rumor claimed that when Evangeline prayed, it was not to any god they knew. Then there were the children, 3 of them. Lucian, the eldest son, tall and silent as his father; Isolde, no older than 8, with skin so pale her veins mapped like rivers beneath; and Ambrose, the youngest, whose laughter was seldom heard and never seemed to reach his eyes. None of them attended church. None were seen playing in the meadows with the other children. In fact, they were rarely seen at all. When they did appear, it was only at dusk, pale silhouettes lingering at the edge of the tree line before slipping back into the darkness like phantoms. Soon the whispers began. The Ravencrofts did not age as others did, neighbors claimed. Alistair looked as he had the day they arrived, and Evangeline's beauty seemed untouched by the years. Their livestock thrived when others starved, their crops grew tall even through drought. Some settlers insisted they had seen lights flickering in the windows at midnight, accompanied by strange sounds, low chanting in a language no one recognized. A hunter swore that while passing their estate one winter's night, he heard what he believed was the sound of a child weeping, followed by a scream so sharp it froze his blood. He never returned to that part of the forest again. What gave strength to these rumors were the fragments of letters and journal entries discovered centuries later, documents so brittle they nearly turned to dust when touched. One letter, written in Alistair's hand, bore an unsettling line: "The blood holds the key. Purity must be preserved, whatever the cost. For only through sacrifice can transcendence be attained." And in Evangeline's journal, scrawled in ink that bled like a wound across the page, "They do not understand what we are. They call it sin, but it is salvation. Our children are not like theirs, they are more." As these words reveal, the Ravencroft legacy was not bound by the common fears of the frontier. Their ambitions reached beyond life and death, into something older, darker, and far more dangerous. But ambition has a cost, and soon the people of Illinois would begin to pay it. What came next was not mere rumor, but horror carved into the very soil of Ravencroft Hollow. The vanishings began quietly: a child gone missing on her way to the river, then a hunter who never returned, each disappearance pulling the settlement closer to a terror no prayer could banish. It began with a child. Her name was Clara Whitmore, only 7 years old, last seen carrying a pail to the frozen creek one bleak afternoon in January. The snow had just started falling, soft and silent. when her mother heard a scream rip through the stillness, a sound so raw it seemed to tear the world apart. By the time neighbors reached the banks of the creek, the pail lay on its side, half buried in snow, its handle bent as if wrenched by inhuman strength. There were no tracks, no blood, nothing but the endless white stretching into the trees. They searched until darkness swallowed the forest, calling her name until their voices cracked, but the woods gave nothing back. Clara's disappearance unsettled the settlement, but in those days such tragedies were common. Wolves, river ice, accidents. There were many explanations. It was the second loss that chilled the community to the bone. Jonas Briggs, a seasoned trapper, vanished without a trace less than a week later. He had set out before dawn, leaving behind a wife and infant son. By noon, neighbors found his cabin door swinging open, his rifle still propped by the hearth, a bowl of stew cooling on the table. Outside, the snow was marked by something, deep gouges in the frozen earth, as if claws had raked through the soil. They found no footprints, human or animal, only a trail of red, thin as thread, that ended abruptly at the tree line. By February, fear had seeped into every corner of Ravencroft Hollow. People barred their doors before sunset. Mothers kept their children close, warning them not to stray beyond the cabin steps. Still, the vanishings continued. Livestock were found slaughtered, their carcasses arranged in strange patterns, entrails coiled like cymbals in the snow. A hunter swore he saw pale figures standing between the trees at dusk, watching him with eyes that glimmered unnaturally before melting into the shadows. And then there were the sounds. Settlers spoke of hearing hymns, low droning chants carried on the wind, long after midnight, when the land should have been swallowed in silence. Some claimed the words were foreign, others that they were not words at all but something older, inhuman. On nights when the moon was full, witnesses reported lights flickering through the windows of the Ravencroft Manor, glowing like embers in the blackness. No one dared approach. Those who lived closest began carving crosses into their doors and hanging iron above their thresholds, muttering prayers through cracked lips as the winter deepened. Newspaper clippings from the period, preserved in brittle ink, capture the terror consuming the territory, authorities baffled by strange disappearances, 6 missing in as many weeks. Sheriff urges caution, dismisses talk of witchcraft. But even as officials dismissed the whispers, fear grew like a sickness. Diaries recovered from neighboring families speak of waking to find strange symbols carved into fence posts, circles intersected by jagged lines, stained dark as if drawn in blood. One entry, penned by a farmer named Ezra Cobb, reads, "Saw them again tonight. 3 shapes by the tree line. Thought them deer at first, but their faces, pale as bone, and their eyes like glass. Watched me without moving. I fired a shot, swear the bullet passed clean through, for they did not fall." By the end of winter, 12 souls had vanished. Not a trace of them ever found, not a body, not a bone. Only silence, broken by the wind rattling through the bare trees and the distant echo of something that sounded almost like singing. The settlement was unraveling. Fear had hardened into something sharper, anger, suspicion, a gnawing certainty that the evil was not in the forest but behind the shuttered windows of the Ravencroft estate. For weeks, neighbors whispered of storming the manor, of dragging its inhabitants into the snow and forcing confessions from their bloodless lips. But they never had the chance, because before they could act, the Ravencrofts made their move, and what happened on that night would stain the ground of Illinois forever. The night of January 3rd arrived like a suffocating shadow, heavy with a storm that churned the sky and howled through the skeletal branches of the forest. The settlers of Ravencroft Hollow huddled in their cabins, doors bolted tight against the wind's fury. Outside, the world was a blur of snow and darkness, the moon swallowed behind a blanket of storm clouds. But inside the Ravencroft Manor, a different kind of storm was brewing, one far darker and more terrible than the biting cold. That evening, 12 neighbors, men, women, even children, accepted an invitation that would mark their fate forever. It was a rare gesture from the Ravencrofts, who had long been shrouded in silence and suspicion. The invitation, sealed with the family crest, promised warmth, food, and the chance to mend frayed ties. Hunger and isolation had worn down the community's fear, and so they came, stepping through the manor's heavy oak doors into a world lit only by flickering candlelight and shadow. What happened inside those walls is pieced together only by whispers and fragments, for no one from that night ever returned to tell the tale. But when the storm finally broke and dawn crept over the horizon, the estate was found abandoned, eerily silent as a graveyard. The hearths were cold, the tables overturned, and walls streaked with crimson that refused to dry even in the bitter cold. Tracks in the snow told a grim story. Heavy sacks were dragged from the manor, their shapes grotesque beneath tattered canvas. Witnesses who dared approach spoke of a stench so foul it clawed at their throats, an odor of rot and iron that lingered long after the snow swallowed the footprints. Inside, investigators would later discover signs of a horrific ritual. Broken restraints nailed to the floor, blood-soaked hymn sheets torn and scattered, and symbols etched into the walls in what appeared to be dried blood. Among the ruins lay shards of glass vials, some shattered, others filled with a dark, coagulated liquid. A surgeon's scalpel, its blade nicked and stained, rested on the floor as if dropped mid-use. The ravaged remains of 12 chairs circled a great oak table, their backs carved with cryptic symbols no one could decipher. An overturned chalice lay shattered beneath one, its contents spilled and frozen in place. Some said the screams of that night echoed through the valley for weeks, carried on the wind like a curse. Despite search parties scouring the surrounding woods, no sign of the missing were ever found. No bodies, no bones, only the endless stretch of snow and silence. Some settlers claimed they saw fleeting shapes lurking beyond the tree line, pale and hunched, moving with unnatural speed. The night of blood did not mark the end. It marked a new beginning, a chapter of darkness that would haunt Illinois for decades, and at its center stood the Ravencrofts, no longer simply a family, but the embodiment of a terror no one dared name aloud. What followed would draw the attention of men beyond the territory, an outsider whose arrival would unravel the twisted web of secrets the Ravencrofts had so carefully spun. In the wake of the disappearances and the chilling events at the Ravencroft estate, word spread beyond the scattered settlements and rough-hewn cabins of Illinois. The territorial government, desperate to quell rumors that threatened to ignite panic, dispatched an investigator, Samuel Dwyer, a man known for his sharp mind and unyielding resolve. Dwyer arrived in Ravencroft Hollow as winter's grip began to loosen, the snow melting into slush that soaked through his boots and chilled him to the bone. Unlike the local settlers, who were steeped in superstition and fear, Dwyer was a man of reason. A former military officer turned government agent, he carried little patience for ghost stories or whispered curses. His task was simple: find out what happened to the missing 12 and restore order. His first impression of the Ravencroft manor was one of profound unease. The house stood abandoned, its windows shuttered and stained with grime, as if it had been waiting, watching, for his arrival. Inside, the air was thick with a stale scent of decay and something metallic, like old blood. Floors creaked beneath his boots, and shadows seemed to cling to the corners of the dimly lit rooms. As he examined the estate, Dwyer uncovered fragments of a journal, its pages yellowed and brittle, written in a hurried scrawl. The entries belonged to Alistair Ravencroft himself, chronicling experiments aimed at perfecting the human bloodline. The language was clinical, filled with medical terminology that clashed with disturbing references to purity and transcendence. One passage sent a chill down Dwyer's spine. The vessels must be cleansed, the impurity drained away. Only then can the soul ascend beyond mortal decay. Night after night, Dwyer pored over these notes by candlelight, his skepticism slowly giving way to a growing dread. He recorded in his own journal, "The manor is no longer simply a place of dwelling. It is a tomb of twisted science and dark ritual. The line between doctor and monster has been obliterated." Despite his rational mind, strange occurrences plagued Dwyer's investigation. Doors slammed without cause, faint whispers echoed through empty halls, and on several occasions he swore he glimpsed pale figures watching from the edge of the woods, silent sentinels with eyes that gleamed unnaturally in the moonlight. As he delved deeper, Dwyer discovered the ledger, a thick, leather-bound book hidden beneath loose floorboards. Its pages detailed blood transfusions conducted under candlelight, lists of names marked for purification, and accounts of patients who never left the manor alive. The evidence was undeniable. The Ravencrofts had transformed their estate into a laboratory of horror. But the most disturbing revelation came in the form of a final, unfinished entry. "Tonight the children shall partake in the rite. Their innocence is the key to unlocking the next phase. If this fails, all will be lost." What exactly transpired after that night remains unknown. But for Dwyer, the investigation had crossed into a realm where reason faltered and the shadows deepened. His report, sealed for decades, hinted at horrors beyond comprehension, secrets the authorities preferred buried. As the winter thawed, Dwyer left Ravencroft hollow with more questions than answers, knowing full well that the nightmare was far from over. As Samuel Dwyer's investigation deepened, the true horror lurking within the Ravencroft estate began to unravel, a secret so dark it defied belief. Hidden beneath layers of dust and decay, he uncovered evidence of a clandestine blood cult, a twisted fusion of medical experimentation and ancient forbidden rituals that had consumed the family for decades. The Ravencrofts were not merely eccentric scientists or isolated settlers. They were zealots obsessed with blood purity and transcendence. Dwyer's unearthed documents revealed chilling details of ceremonies conducted in the dead of night, where blood was drawn not for healing but as an offering to shadowy forces. The family's journal spoke of cleansing the lineage through sacrifices, blending alchemical science with arcane incantations whispered in a forgotten tongue. One entry described a harrowing rite: the crimson tide flows, binding flesh and spirit. Through the vessel's pain the gateway opens. The blood must be willingly given, though it tears the soul apart. Survivor testimonies, fragments passed down through frightened neighbors, told of figures cloaked in dark robes, faces hidden beneath hoods, moving silently through the woods to secret meeting places marked by carved stones and twisted symbols. These gatherings were said to culminate in horrifying acts designed to harness what the Ravencrofts called the sacred power of blood. Dwyer pieced together the fate of the missing settlers. They had been lured into the manor under false pretenses, subjected to grotesque rituals and experiments that blurred the lines between science and sorcery. The children were especially targeted, believed to carry the purest blood, essential for the cult's unholy goals. But the investigation also uncovered evidence of internal conflict within the family itself. Evangeline's journal hinted at doubt and fear, her words trembling beneath the conviction. Alistair's vision grows darker each night. I fear what we have become, but the path back has long since been lost. This fracture would prove pivotal, exposing cracks in the Ravencrofts' grim empire and setting the stage for their eventual downfall. As the final pieces of the puzzle fell into place, Dwyer's reports were met with disbelief and suppression. Authorities feared the scandal would ignite panic, and the true extent of the Ravencroft blood cult was buried beneath layers of official silence. But the chilling legacy remained, etched into the very soil of Illinois, whispered in the rustling leaves, and remembered in the fearful glances cast toward the ruins of a manor that once harbored unspeakable evil. The question that haunts us still: how many lives were consumed in the name of blood? And what dark powers, if any, did the Ravencrofts truly awaken? As whispers of the Ravencroft cult spread beyond the hollow, fear turned to fury among the neighboring settlements. A growing coalition of settlers, driven by desperation and rage, resolved to confront the source of their torment. But when they marched to the manor under the cover of a moonless night, they found it empty, doors flung wide, halls stripped bare, and no sign of the family or their followers. The estate was abandoned, as if the occupants had vanished into thin air. Inside, remnants of hastily discarded belongings lay scattered: blood-stained robes, broken glass instruments, and torn pages from journals left open on desks. On the walls, crude symbols were scratched deep into the plaster, their meanings lost, but their menace unmistakable. Locals spoke of strange phenomena in the days that followed: flickering lights in the windows of the empty house, distant chanting carried on the wind, and shadows that moved with unnatural intent among the trees. Some claimed that on still nights, the faintest sound of weeping children could be heard coming from beneath the estate. Government officials arrived weeks later, but by then, the Ravencrofts and their cult had vanished without a trace. No bodies were found, no clues to their fate, only the heavy silence of a place marked by terror and mystery. Samuel Dwyer's final report, never officially released, hinted at darker possibilities. He speculated that the family may have fled deeper into the wilderness or met a more sinister end, swallowed by the very forces they sought to control. The manor itself slowly decayed, falling into ruin and becoming a ghostly monument to a nightmare-long past. Over time, Ravencroft Hollow was reclaimed by the forest, the soil hiding secrets that may never be unearthed. But the legacy of the Ravencrofts endured, passed down in hushed tales around campfires, in the wary glances of those who lived near the ruins, and in the sealed archives that still guard the darkest chapters of Illinois history. Were the Ravencrofts destroyed by their own horrors, or did they escape to continue their dark work elsewhere? The truth remains lost to time, waiting perhaps to be uncovered once more. More than 2 centuries have passed since the last flicker of candlelight vanished from the Ravencroft Manor, yet the shadows of that dark chapter still linger in the forests of Illinois. Locals speak in hushed tones of strange lights flickering among the trees on cold autumn nights, ghostly orbs that drift silently over the ruins, vanishing when approached. Some swear they hear faint chanting carried on the wind, echoes of a ritual never fully ended. In recent years, paranormal investigators have been drawn to Ravencroft Hollow, recording unexplained sounds, cold spots, and inexplicable electromagnetic disturbances. One such team documented a chilling voice whispering a language no one could identify, while another captured fleeting figures just beyond the edge of their night vision cameras, shapes too pale and swift to be human. The land itself seems restless. Farmers near the old estate report livestock behaving erratically, crops failing without cause, and an unease that seeps into the bones of those who live too close. Even historians who have studied the sealed records speak of a palpable dread that clings to the documents, as if the past resents being uncovered. Though the Ravencrofts vanished, their legacy appears etched into the very fabric of the region. Folklore warns children not to wander after dark near the hollow, while older residents speak of a family curse, an unbroken line of darkness that may yet awaken. What truths lie buried beneath the earth? Are the whispers of the past merely stories, or do they conceal a secret that refuses to die? One thing is certain, the story of the Ravencroft family is far from over, and in the stillness of Illinois' darkest woods, the shadows watch and wait. If you found yourself drawn into this tale, comment below your thoughts and theories. Do you believe the Ravencroft curse still haunts this land? Subscribe for more forbidden histories that lurk just beyond the light.